Hi, and welcome to the Education Officer debate. I'm your chair for tonight, afternoon. Mark, and we have with us candidates for the role, Roberta Holditch.
Yeah.
Please feel free to submit questions through Twitter or on Facebook and through the Google form. Please make sure all questions you submit are submitted such that they can be answered by any question and not directed at a specific candidate, even if there's only one candidate running for a role. Also, please be aware that there is also RON available in all elections, so reopen nominations. And without any further, I think that's all the announcements done. So if we now move on to questions. So the first question is, what motivated you to run for the role of Education Officer?
So since coming to Cambridge 2.5 years ago, I've been pretty disillusioned with a lot of the way education is run here. And while Cambridge has done a lot of really great things for me and we've opened a lot of doors, it's also been just unbelievably difficult for me as someone with a disability and who's kind of struggled with mental health issues throughout my time here. And I've often felt, and I know a lot of other people are in the same position, that the entire system is kind of stuck against us. And then the other point is that I felt like the way my course is structured. I study HSPS, but I know this is an issue in a lot of other subjects as well, things like history. So that the things we learn are just really not up to date. They're not particularly sort of relevant in a lot of ways, and they're often kind of taught as though sort of developments in subjects stopped after like the 1970s. People don't have a chance to kind of specialize until really late on in their degrees, and just kind of the variety of different voices and perspectives that we hear are very limited. So a lot of courses, this applies mainly to humanities subjects, but it's kind of a problem across the board. A lot of the curricula are very sort of like white, male and Eurocentric. And I'm running for Education Officer to change what we learn and how we learn in order to include more people in education and ensure that Cambridge stays at the cutting edge of research and teaching, because I very strongly believe that the university as a whole suffers if it doesn't modernize, because it will stop attracting top talent and it will eventually fall behind.
Okay, so I think that leads nicely on to what's the highest priority on your manifesto?
Yeah, so anyone who's kind of read my manifesto will have seen that I'm running on a general platform of sort of liberation of academia and kind of broad change, which will obviously be a very long-term process. So I'd say in terms of very concrete policies, the first ones I try to implement are those that directly engage with students and offer sort of concrete support for them. So my first act as Education Officer would be running a large-scale university-wide education survey to find out what matters to students, what changes are most important to them, and then also at the same time kind of declutter the whole faculty rep network and establish a sort of comprehensive database of student representatives so that people can easily find out who represents them at what level and who they can contact with which problems, so that students really feel like CUSU is representing them and is there for them and is supporting them.
Okay, so we'll move on to a question that was sent in, which I think links back to what you've been saying earlier about a lot of the time Cambridge courses are quite different from what students expect before they come here. How would you change that?
So I think that question kind of has two parts. Firstly, if people really don't know in advance what their courses are going to be like, what their content and the format is going to be. I think that's an access issue. So I'd work with the access officer to kind of make sure they're more comprehensive with subject open days, more online information for people to access, more sort of maybe things like an access blog with sort of a day in the life of a student thing. So I definitely work with the access officer on that. Then also, I don't necessarily think that kind of Cambridge courses being different from what people maybe experienced at school is necessarily a bad thing, but I do think there has to be a lot more support to sort of manage that transition from school into university, because I think a lot of the Cambridge system is kind of built around this mystique of you never really know how to do well because there's just this idea of if you have this special something then you're just going to make it, and if you don't then whereas that's actually a really sort of like classed issue. If you've been to a school that has sort of extensively trained you for this system, then you will probably do better than someone who's never had that experience. And so one idea that I have is to for CUSU to collaborate with faculties to run sort of specific study skills, essay writing workshops, maybe sort of supervision workshops, so that people actually know what's expected of them, how they can do well, and kind of take that mystique away and kind of put everyone on an even ground.
Okay. So carrying on with the role of interacting with other sabbatical officers, we've got a question here about how do you see your role interacting with other sabbatical officers, including the new CUSU Disabled Students Officer?
So yeah, I obviously just kind of addressed a bit how I work with the access officer. I think a lot of the problems with education here is also a huge barrier to access, because people sort of see this system and don't feel like it's somewhere something they can participate in, somewhere they can kind of exist and actually do the best they can. So I think there should be a lot more collaboration between access and education to address that issue. I was very involved in the campaign for a disabled students officer, and it's something that's like very, very close to my heart as a disabled student myself. So I think one thing that's incredibly important is getting adequate support for disabled students in supervisions and lectures. So I think something that I could work on with the disabled students officer is getting lecturers to, for example, record lectures and put them online, put extensive notes or slides for their lectures online on Cantos. It's such an easy thing that exists at like so many other universities already, but there's this kind of idea again that, well, it will stop students from going to lectures, or if you don't go to lectures, then you obviously just don't care enough about your course, which is obviously completely wrong, because for some people, just getting up in the morning because of mental health issues is like a huge thing. For some people who have sort of restricted mobility, it's physically impossible to go to lectures, and sort of excluding them from education because of their disabilities is, I think, completely unacceptable and something that has to be improved. I also want to work with the disabilities officer and the autonomous campaigns like BME and the Women's Campaign to sort of implement a better kind of supervisor training. There's a really great initiative which was set up by graduate students called the Ethical Teaching Forum, where they basically get together as grad students who are also supervisors to sort of talk about how they can make their supervisions better for all students, and sort of include their specific needs, include other perspectives. And so that's something I would kind of work with as well, with the sort of precedent they've set, to make sure that supervisors are sort of adequately informed about what it means to be disabled, the broad range of disabilities that exist, that disabilities are often invisible, that you can have physical invisible disabilities, you can also have learning disabilities that aren't. Like, dyslexia that are kind of less obvious and like less well known, and to just make sure that supervisors know about that and that they're kind of forced to take that into account, and not discriminate against students just because they've never sort of been told about it or never been forced to think about it.
Okay. So the next couple of questions are going to be less Cambridge centric and more general university. So the first one is about the current funding situation for higher education, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, so I think the current funding situation is incredibly dire and just getting worse, with the abolition of grants for undergraduates and of the transfer of all of that into more loans. It's something that kind of on the surface could look quite good in terms of students will have access to more money straight away, but it will all be structured through loans, which just means that people who, students who already come from disadvantaged backgrounds will come out of university with more debt and kind of be under even more pressure to sort of succeed within this system. I think the financing options which have just been introduced for postgraduate study are a really good step in the right direction, but they're like really, really long overdue. And I also feel like that's sort of one step forward, where in sort of other places the government's sort of making like 3 or 4 steps backwards. One thing that really bothers me about this sort of thing is that the entire student loan system is in the hands of like private companies, so that people will have to pay their loans back with interest. So it's not just that you come out of university with like extortionate amounts of debt, but you also actually have to pay more than those fees back to the student loans company. And that just means that people, actually most students who can't pay their tuition fees up front, actually pay more for their education than people who come from very sort of advanced backgrounds and can just pay everything up front. One other thing is the situation for international students as well, where international students have an incredibly hard time trying to secure any funding, which means that the international students that manage to come and do an undergraduate degree in the UK are usually from sort of the most like upper class backgrounds, and I think that's really bad for diversity, for international access, and that's again something I really want to work on with the Access Officer, as well as the CUSU, the International Students Campaign.
Okay. So last question here is, how do you feel about Prevent?
Yeah, so maybe for people who don't know what Prevent is, I should say like a few words about that. So Prevent is part of the government's anti-terrorism policy, and which sort of aims to try to prevent people from becoming radicalized and sort of becoming involved in like terrorist activity. For universities, that specifically means that academics, student unions, etc., are being asked to sort of keep an eye on Muslim students in particular, to sort of make sure that they don't engage in radical activity or thought or whatever. And yeah, I think Prevent, I could talk about this for like half an hour and I won't, but I've got very, very strong, very negative views about it. I think it's unbelievably like discriminatory and racist, and anyone who sort of like wants to come back at me saying like Muslims and race, like obviously Islamophobia is incredibly racialized. There are lots of examples of this being used in a really dodgy, awful way. Like there's a kind of big story a while back of a graduate student who was a Muslim doing sort of terrorism studies. I can't remember what university this was at, but someone basically reported him because they saw him reading a book on terrorism, and then he had to go through like months and months of just kind of questioning by the university to sort of justify his research interests, which would never happen if this had been a sort of white person doing the same research, and B, if it was like a white Christian person doing research on like the Westboro Baptist Church or like other kind of like Christian fundamentalism. So I think the whole thing is just completely geared on marginalizing Muslim students, discriminating against them, and that's exactly what terrorist organizations want us to do. Because by kind of like driving Muslim students and other young people like to the edges of society more and making them feel less welcome in this country, that's exactly the kind of thing that would like be likely to drive people into terrorism and radical thought. So something I would definitely want to do, even though it's something I'd obviously have to discuss with other CUSU members and sort of Muslim students themselves, is I'd love CUSU to kind of pass a motion to take an active stand against the prevent duty. I know that like a lot of student unions it has been suggested to their officers to kind of undergo this training where you're sort of taught how to like spot someone being radicalized and kind of like how to like report them to higher authorities, which again I think it's just kind of like glorified spying and like veiling your racism in a sort of like government sanctioned program. So I think if CUSU was ever asked to kind of engage with that, I'd like them to actively say no and not participate in any of that training until the government comes up with a plan that's not actively racist.
Okay. And at that point, we have no further questions. So I'll just finish to remind everyone that voting opens at midnight on the 1st of March and closes at 7 p.m. on the 3rd of March. So that's Tuesday to Thursday next week. Hustings is Monday evening at 7 p.m. in Mill Lane Lecture Room 1. Please bring questions to that you want to ask any of the candidates. There will also be road shows on Sidgwick site on the Tuesday and Wednesday, and Downing site on the Thursday, 10:30 a.m. to 1 p.m, where Elections Committee will be present, as well as a selection of candidates for any questions you have about the elections. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.